Augusta Vale counted $4 onto the green cloth of her writing table, pushed the coins across it with one finger, and then made her granddaughter push them back. A gift, she explained to the room, can be complained of afterwards. A purchase cannot. There were 5 people in the morning room at Verrall Park on the 12th of November 1834, and 4 of them enjoyed it very much. Mr. Gethin Crowell, who had drawn the deed and would be paid for it whatever it did to anybody, laughed into his cuff. The 2 Miss Hardys, cousins from the far side of the family and staying a fortnight, laughed because Augusta had smiled. Augusta did not laugh at all. She had the coins swept into a japanned box, and she wrote out a receipt in her own hand, and she signed it, and she made the girl sign under it. The 5th person in the room was Honora Vale. She was 22 years old. She counted the $4 a second time before she let them go, not because she doubted the sum, but because they were the last money she had in the world, and she wanted to know exactly what the moment cost. What she got for them was Coldharbour Grange, in the parish of Wychmore, 7 miles off across the county, together with 4 years of unpaid parish rate and a notice from the surveyor of highways about a fallen wall. Her grandmother called it her portion. It is worth saying plainly what Augusta Vale believed she was doing, because she believed it to her last day and said so at dinner tables that stopped inviting her. She believed she was being generous. The girl had no claim on her. The girl's father, Edward Vale, had been the second son, and in 1828 he had married a land agent's daughter with $120 a year of her own, and Augusta had struck him out of the family in the only way a woman in her position could, not with a scene, but by never mentioning him again. When Edward died of a chest complaint in the spring of 1832, and his wife followed him inside the year, the daughter came to Verrall Park because there was nowhere else, and lived there for 2 years and 7 months in a north bedroom with a cracked pane, and was spoken of in the 3rd person at her own end of the table. Augusta's exact phrase, delivered in front of guests and repeated afterwards by at least 3 of them, was that Honora was of no consequence, so the Grange was in her mind a settlement of an obligation that did not exist. It was also a joke, and Augusta was too intelligent not to know it. Coldharbour Grange had stood empty since 1812. The last owner had died in it. The roof of the south wing was open to the sky in 2 places, and the glass range along it had come down in the gale of 1829 and been left where it fell. Nobody in Wychmore would go up the drive after dark, and the parish had been trying for 11 years to make somebody, anybody, pay the rate on it. Crowell's deed, however, was drawn very wide indeed. That was deliberate too. Augusta had instructed him that the girl was to have this, and nothing else, ever. So the conveyance recited that she took the messuage called Coldharbour Grange, with all its yards, barns, brewhouse, outbuildings, cellars, vaults, ways, and all things whatsoever, thereto belonging or therewith, usually held or enjoyed. Crowell was rather proud of that sentence. He read it out twice. Honora Vale walked out of Verrall Park at 9 the next morning with a canvas bag, a rolled bedroll over one shoulder, her father's marbled account book, and no money at all. Amos Thurlow, the carrier, took her bag as far as the crossroads because he was going that way, and would not take anything for it, and told the whole of Wychmore by supper that Miss Vale had come to the Grange on foot. She came up the drive at about 2 in the afternoon and stopped, because everybody stops. Coldharbour Grange is a very large house. That is the first thing, and for 23 years it had been the only thing anybody said about it. 11 bays of grey stone, 3 stories, 6 gables along the front, set square on a shoulder of ground above the brook, with the whole valley open below it. It had been remade in the 1720s, on much older footings, and whoever remade it had built for a family that expected to matter for 200 years. The stone had gone black with lichen. The gutters had come away on the west side and cut a green stain 40 feet down the wall. The glass range along the south wing lay in a long glitter of broken panes among the nettles, its iron ribs still standing up out of the wreck like the bones of something. In the whole front of the house there was not one unbroken run of roof. It was enormous, and it was ruined, and there was frost on the north side of everything at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and Honora Vale stood in the drive with her bedroll and looked at it for a long time. She went through the house first, because she had to know what she owned. The front door was not locked, and had not been locked since 1812, and the key was standing in it on the inside. 11 bays gave her a hall 2 stories high, with a stone stair rising out of it. Beyond that, a saloon, a library with the shelves still up and nothing on them, a dining room with a chimney piece the length of a cart, and a kitchen wing with a range 4 people could have worked at once. Upstairs there were 19 rooms she could get into, and 4 she could not. In the south wing there was sky where the ceiling should have been, and a birch tree 8 feet high, growing out of the floor of what had been a bedroom. There was nothing in any of it, not a chair, not a curtain, not a fire iron. Kesteven's niece had sold every stick out of the house by auction in 1815, before she sold the house itself, and the buyers had carried the lot away in 3 days. Then she went to find a room with a roof. There was exactly one, and it was not in the house. Against the yard wall stood the brewhouse, a low stone building with a good slate roof, a big copper set in brickwork at the far end, a stone flagged floor, and a window looking into the yard. It was dry. It had a chimney that drew. On her first night, she got a fire going under the copper, ate the bread misses. Fen at the ploughshare had pressed on her, and set her lamp on the sill of that window, because she wanted to be able to find the door again when she went out to the pump in the dark. From the village, 3/4 of a mile below and across the brook, they saw one window lit in a black house that had been black since 1812. Mrs. Hepzibah Fen came up the next day with a basket she called a mistake in her baking, and told her the story of the place, because somebody was going to, and it might as well be somebody sensible. The Grange was unlucky. Sir Rowland Kesteven had built the greater part of it up, had money out of London that nobody understood, went strange in his last years, and would not have a servant sleep in the house, and had been found at the foot of his own stairs in the January of 1812, with the doors bolted on the inside. His niece sold everything 3 years after, and the Vales bought it, and no Vale had slept a night in it since. Twice it had been let to farmers who gave it up. Once a family from Ludsham had taken the east rooms for a summer and gone home in 3 weeks. That was all. That was 23 years of village opinion, and it came down to this: something in that house does not want you. Nora wrote in the account book that night, "Brewhouse dry, house not. Rate owing, $19. Coal none." Then she wrote the date, and under it, $4. which was what the whole of it had cost her. The first winter is not a story of a fortune. It is a story of a young woman who got up at 5:30. She had no money, so she made some. She cleared the fallen glass out of the south wing with a barrow and sold the lead flashing that was already lying loose off the fallen range, and that gave her enough to buy nails. She took in mending from 3 farms and did it by the fire under the copper. She found the Grange orchard, 11 acres of it, unpruned for 2 decades and still fruiting, and Amos Thurlow hauled the crop to Ludsham for a share, and that was the first real money that came up that drive since 1812. She hired Bartholomew Crewe, the mason, at 2 shillings a day and his food, and the 2 of them spent November and December getting the roof of the kitchen wing shut. Not because she needed the kitchen wing, but because a house with water coming through it dies from the inside, and she had read enough of her father's farm books to know it. She kept the account book the way her father had kept his. Every entry on the day it happened. Money in on the left and money out on the right. And at the foot of every week, a line of remarks that had nothing to do with money at all. Where the water stands after rain. Which chimneys draw, and which smoke back. Which walls dry first after a thaw. Edward Vale had been a second son with no land of his own, and had spent his life managing other men's, and he had taught his daughter the only thing he had to leave her, which was that a building will tell you everything about itself if you write down what it does for a year and then read your own handwriting. The parish sent a man about the rate. She showed him the book, showed him what the orchard had made, paid him $3 of it, and asked for the arrears to be taken by the quarter. He went back and reported that the young woman at the Grange had produce, accounts, and a mason on the place, which was more than the parish had got out of Coldharbour in a decade. By Christmas she had a reputation in Wychmore, and it was not the one Verrall Park would have predicted. She paid Crewe on a Saturday out of a purse, and was never once short. She did her own hauling with a borrowed handcart down a hill that took 40 minutes each way with a load on. When the December gale took a run of tiles off the ploughshare, she was up on the innkeeper's roof with Crewe at 8 the next morning, and would not be paid for it. Somewhere in that month, Mrs. Fenn stopped calling her Miss Vale and began calling her Miss Nora, which in that parish was a promotion and was understood by everybody to be one. Crewe was the only man in Wychmore who would work up there. He did not believe the house was unlucky. He believed the house was cold, which was different, and he said so, and it is the closest thing to a clue anyone gave her. Because the cold was the thing she had begun to notice. The brewhouse was a stone building with a flagged floor and 1 window, and it should have been the coldest place she owned. It was not. In the corner beyond the copper, along about 8 feet of the end wall, the chill never bit the way it bit everywhere else. Her boots did not sweat on those flags. The old grey cat that had come with the orchard and adopted the brewhouse would sleep nowhere else, not by the fire, but on the bare stone in that corner, every night. In December, which is not what a cat does, she wrote it down in the week's remarks without any theory attached to it. Cat sleeps cold corner, not fire. Then she tried the ordinary explanations one at a time, the way her father would have. It was not the copper, because the copper was cold for 6 days in a row that month, and the corner was not. It was not the sun, because the wall faced north and there was no sun on it from October to March. It was not a drain, because a drain in a flagged floor in that weather would have been the coldest thing in the building, and not the warmest. She ran out of explanations somewhere in the last week of December, and, having run out, she simply kept watching the corner, which is the entire difference between her and every other Vale in this story. On the morning of the 4th of January, 1835, it had frozen hard for 3 days, and there was a white rime lying over everything, indoors and out, of the kind that furs the inside of a window and stands on the head of a nail. Nora came into the brewhouse at 6 and stopped in the doorway. The whole floor was white. Every flag was furred with frost, right up to the walls, all the way to the door, except for a rectangle in the corner beyond the copper, running from the end wall out into the room, where the stone was bare and dark and dry, with a clean frost line round it as sharp as if it had been drawn with a straightage. She stood there with the lamp until she was quite sure she was not seeing a patch of spilled water. Then she went and got the account book and wrote down the length and the breadth of the bare rectangle, and the date and the temperature off the dairy thermometer, which was 19 degrees. Warm ground makes no frost. Warm ground, in January, in a stone building with no fire in it, means air. It means a space underneath, big enough to hold its own warmth and old enough to have any. She did 3 more things over the next 2 days, all of them written down in the same hand in the same book, and any one of them would have been enough on its own. She poured half a bucket of water on the middle of the bare rectangle, and it stood, as it should, on a laid stone floor. And then, over about a quarter of an hour, it went away down a joint at the end wall, which it should not. She set a lit candle on the flags at the foot of that wall, in a room with the door shut and the window stuffed, and the flame leaned. Not once, every time. And she paced the brewhouse outside along the yard, and then paced it inside, and the outside was 6 feet longer than the inside. 6 feet of stone building that had no room in it. She told nobody but Bartholomew Crewe, and she told him on the 5th of January, standing in that corner with the lamp, and he put his palm flat on the end wall and left it there a while, and then said the thing that decided it. This wall is not the wall. He showed her the plaster, which was later plaster over brick, and he showed her that the brick was laid in a different bond from every other wall in the building, and that the mortar had a look he did not like at all, which meant, he said, that somebody had built it in a hurry and had not expected it to be looked at. They opened it on the 7th, 8th, and 9th of January. It took that long because Crewe would not let her rush it, and because the brick skin was thicker than it had any business being. Behind the plaster was a single skin of brick. Behind that skin was a stone doorway, an old one with a chamfered arch, and set into the stone doorway, filling it completely, was a door of oak faced with riveted iron plate, 4 feet wide, studded in rows, with 3 lock plates set one above another, and hinges that ran the whole width of it. Crewe sat down on a barrow when he saw the 3rd lock. He said he had put doors like that on 2 strong rooms in his life, and both of them had been in banks. They could not pick it, and they did not try. On the 9th of January they took the door with the crowbar and the sledge at the hinges, working from the outside, and it came away from the jam about 4 in the afternoon with a noise Nora said afterwards she could feel in the flagstones, and behind it there was a flight of 8 worn stone steps going down into the dark, and air came up out of it that was dry and still, and warmer than the room they were standing in. She went down with the lantern. The undercroft was brick, barrel vaulted, 22 feet long, and it was full. There were 63 wooden cases standing in it, in 4 ranks, every one of them raised clear of the floor on low stone plinths, every one of them lined with tin and sealed at the seams with pitch. Between the ranks stood flat trays of charcoal and quicklime, gone to powder. The air was as dry as a good granary. There was no watermark anywhere on the brick, and no smell in the place at all except old dust. At the near end, one case had been opened and never closed. Leaning against it, wrapped in tarred canvas that had gone hard as board, was something 6 feet high. Nora set the lantern on a plinth and turned the canvas back, and inside it was a carved gilt frame, and inside the frame was a painting, a dark interior, a table. A woman turned 3/4 away with a glass in her hand and a window behind her, and the varnish so brown with age that she had to bring the lantern within a foot of it before the light came off the glass in the woman's hand. She was 22 years old. She had paid $4 for the building she was standing under, and she had, at that moment, no idea whatever what she was looking at. Crew came down the steps behind her with the second lantern, and neither of them said anything for a while. Then he lifted the lid of the nearest case, which was not nailed but pegged, and folded back the oiled linen inside it, and there were 4 frames in that one case, standing on edge in grooved battens with felt between them, packed by somebody who had done it for a living. The gilding on the outermost had not lost a leaf. Crew put the lid back down as carefully as he had lifted it, and said that whatever these were, a man does not build a room like this and hang a bank door on it for a picture of his own house. They counted the cases twice, from opposite ends, and both times the answer was 63. Nailed inside the strong door, on the flat of it, was a sheet of paper in a horn frame. It was an inventory in a small, clear hand. 63 entries, numbered, each with a name and a size. It was headed with the words, "Laid up by me in this vault against the present troubles." It was dated the 4th of March, 1811. It was signed Roland Kesteven, and it was witnessed by 2 names, and one of the witnesses was a Ludsham solicitor. Nora Vale did not take a single case out of that vault for 9 days. She put the door back across the opening, propped and wedged, and she went to Ludsham on the 11th of January and sat in the office over the saddlers and told Mr. Ambrose Ledbury exactly what she had, in order from the frost line to the horn frame, reading it off the account book. Ledbury was 68. He had acted for her father and had never once been paid on time. He listened to the whole of it without saying anything, and then he got up and went to a shelf of brown paper parcels tied with tape, and took one down, and it was the Coldharbour parcel, and he had had it since 1815. 2 things came out of it. The first was the conveyance of 1815, by which Sir Roland Kesteven's niece had sold Coldharbour Grange to Nathaniel Vale, Augusta's husband, 3 years after Kesteven died. It sold the messuage, the land, the buildings, and then, in the ordinary formula of the time, together with all goods, chattels and effects now being in or upon the said premises. 19 years. The Vale family had owned those 63 pictures for 19 years, and had never once been down the steps. The second thing was a letter, pinned to the back of the deed. It was from the vendor's agent, dated 1815, and it listed the small defects of the property for the buyer's information, and the 4th item on the list read, "The cellar under the brewhouse is bricked up, and the key not to be found." Across the corner of that letter, In a strong, upright hand, somebody had written 2 words and initialed them. Of no consequence. A.V. Augusta had read it. In 1815, as a young wife going through her husband's purchase papers, she had read that letter, decided a bricked cellar was nothing, and written on it. And in 1829, when Nathaniel died, and Coldharbour Grange came to her under his will with everything else that was not settled, she had inherited a vault she had personally dismissed 14 years earlier, and had held it, and paid no rate on it, and never gone up the drive, for 5 years. Then she had sold it for $4, with all cellars and vaults, and all things whatsoever thereto belonging, and made the girl sign a receipt so that it could never be undone. Ledbury read Kroll's conveyance 3 times, and then said the only thing he said all afternoon that was not strictly professional, which was that he had never in 40 years seen a man draw a deed so wide against his own client's interest. The news got out the way news does. Bartholomew Crewe told nobody, and kept his word to his last day. Amos Thurlow, however, hauled 2 crates of empty tin-lined cases down to Ludsham for Ledbury's strong room, and a man who hauls crates talks about crates. By the end of January it was in the Ludsham paper as a paragraph about a discovery at Coldharbour. By the middle of February it was in a London paper as a paragraph about a hoard, and in the first week of March Mr. Silas Ferrand of St. James's wrote to Miss Vale asking, with great respect, whether he might come and look. Verrall Park heard it in the 3rd week of January, which is to say 11 days after the door came off. Augusta Vale's first letter was warm. It was, in fact, the first warm letter Nora had ever had from her. It said that she had heard of a quantity of old goods found at the Grange, that such things were family matters, that she would send Kroll and a cart, and that dear Honora was not to trouble herself. Nora answered it in 4 lines and sent it by Thurlow. She wrote that the goods were in her possession, in her building, on her land, under her deed, that they had been inventoried and witnessed, and that any person with a claim was very welcome to make it to Mr. Ledbury. The cart came anyway, on the 29th of January, with Kroll and 2 men. Crewe met them in the yard and did not move out of the gateway, and Mrs. Fenn's eldest ran down to the village, and within 20 minutes there were 9 men from Wychmore standing in that yard with their hands in their pockets, saying nothing at all, and the cart went back empty. That was the moment the parish changed sides, and it had nothing to do with pictures. It had to do with a family that had never paid its rate, coming up the hill with a cart for the girl they had sent up there to starve. Augusta's second attack was much cleverer, and for about 4 weeks it looked as though it would work. Kroll's advice was this: do not claim the goods. Claim that nobody can own them. Petition the Crown, and let the Crown take them, and then let the Crown reward the family that reported it. Coin, plate, and bullion of gold or silver, hidden in the earth by an owner unknown, belong to the king as treasure trove, and it is the coroner who decides. So, on the 11th of February, 1835, Augusta Vale swore an information that a hoard of great value had been found concealed in the ground at Coldharbour Grange, that its owner was unknown, and that it was of right the property of the Crown. She would rather the king had it than her granddaughter. She said so in company, and it was repeated. The inquest of treasure trove was held at the Ploughshare at Wychmore on the 3rd of March, 1835, before Mr. Peter Gaddis, coroner for the 114 jurors from 4 parishes, and it was the best attended inquest in the county in living memory. Ledbury did not make a speech. He put in 3 papers and let Gaddis read them. The first was Kesteven's inventory out of the horn frame, 63 entries, signed dated the 4th of March, 1811, and witnessed by a solicitor whose son was sitting in the room. The second was the 1815 conveyance, with the words all goods, chattels and effects now being in or upon the said premises. The third was the agent's letter about the bricked cellar, with 2 words written across the corner in the informant's own hand, and Ledbury asked, mildly, that the jury be permitted to compare that hand with the hand on the receipt for $4. Gaddis charged the jury in about 6 minutes, and his direction was the plainest law in the case. Treasure trove, he told them, is gold or silver, coin, plate, or bullion, hidden by a person unknown. If the goods are not gold or silver, they are not trove. If the owner is known, they are not trove. Here, he said, the goods are pictures, which are neither gold nor silver whatever their worth, and the man who hid them wrote his name at the bottom of a list of them, dated it, and had it witnessed. There is no case for the Crown to answer, and in his opinion there never was. The jury took 11 minutes. Not treasure trove. It was worse than losing. Augusta had sworn on oath, in a public inquest, in front of 4 parishes, that the goods in that vault had never belonged to any member of her family, because that was the only way they could be the king's. 4 weeks later she went to the spring assizes at Ludsham and asked a jury to believe the exact opposite. The action was trover, the old form for recovering goods wrongfully kept, and it was tried on the 8th of April, 1835. Kroll's case was simple and not at all stupid. The 1834 deed, he said, conveyed land. It conveyed a house, yards, barns, a brewhouse, cellars, and vaults. It did not convey movable goods, and pictures are movable goods. Whatever was in that cellar remained the property of the person who owned it before the deed, and that person was Augusta Vale. Ledbury answered him in 3 parts, and he took them in the worst possible order for his opponent. First, he said, the goods had not been movable at all. They had been immured. Somebody in 1811 had put 63 cases into a stone doorwayed undercroft, set every one of them on a stone plinth built for the purpose, hung an iron-plated door in the arch, walled the door up behind a skin of brick, and plastered the brick over flush with the room. Those cases were not standing in a cellar the way a chair stands in a parlour. They had been built into the fabric of the building, and for 23 years no man could reach them without a crowbar and 3 days' work. What is built into the land goes with the land, and it went with the land in 1815, and in 1829, and again on the 12th of November 1834, 2nd. He read the 1815 conveyance, and observed that this was not the first time these goods had passed with this house, and that they had passed then in the ordinary words that pass such things, and that the buyer had been the plaintiff's own husband. Whatever was in that vault, he said, had been Vale property since 1815. It had come to the plaintiff on her husband's death in 1829. She had held it for 5 years and had sold it, in a deed of her own drawing, with all cellars, vaults, and all things whatsoever thereto belonging. Third and last, he read the agent's letter of 1815, and the 2 words in the corner and the initials. Then he read the receipt for $4, signed in the same hand. Then he sat down. Kroll was on his feet at once with the answer he had been building for a month, which was that his client could not be prejudiced by an old endorsement she did not remember making. He got about a sentence and a half into it before the judge stopped him and asked him a question instead. The question was whether the plaintiff had, or had not, sworn in information on the 11th of February that these goods were the property of the Crown, their owner being unknown. Kroll said that the information had been sworn in a different proceeding. The judge said that it had been sworn by the same woman about the same 63 cases 5 weeks earlier, and that a party who tells the Crown in February that goods were never hers cannot ask a jury in April to give them back to her, and that if Kroll wished to argue otherwise he might, but he should understand what he was arguing. Kroll did not wish to argue otherwise. The jury found for the defendant without leaving the box. The judge gave judgment for Honora Vale with costs, and added one sentence that was printed in 3 counties, and which Augusta Vale had read to her by her companion because she would not look at a newspaper for a month. He said the plaintiff had conveyed away a fortune she never troubled to inspect, and had taken the last $4 of the person she conveyed it to, and that the court could not relieve her from a bargain that was hard only because it was hers. Mr. Silas Ferrand had already been and gone by then. He came in May, spent 9 days at the Grange with the cases open along the brewhouse floor, and wrote his report in a hand as small as Kesteven's. Of the 63, he said, 11 were copies or studio pieces of no great account. 9 were very fine indeed. The rest were good, honest, saleable pictures of the sort that had come out of France in the panic of the 1790s, and been bought for almost nothing by men with ready money, which was exactly what Sir Rowland Kesteven had been. Ferrand's valuation of the whole collection, as it stood on those plinths, was $71,000. Nora sold 9 pictures in London on the 2nd of July, 1835, and they made $34,000. She sold 9 and kept 54, and Ferrand argued with her about it for a whole afternoon, and lost, because she had already worked out on paper what she wanted, and it was not money. It was a roof. The rest of it is the part the county talked about for 30 years. She put the south wing roof back first, in slate off the same quarry, and then the west, and had the gutters and the whole rainwater work of the house renewed in lead before she bought herself so much as a new gown. She had the glass range rebuilt on its own iron ribs. She reopened the great barn and took the home farm in hand herself, with her father's books on the shelf and her own account book on the desk, and by 1838 Coldharbour was carrying 240 acres in her own occupation and employing 19 people, most of them from a village that had spent 23 years explaining that the place was cursed. She never sold another picture. 54 of them hung in the long room on the first floor of the south wing, and from 1839 she let the county in to see them on the first Thursday of every month, free. And there is a note in her book of the numbers, 411 people in the first year. Verrill Park went the other way, and not because of any revenge. Augusta had costs to pay from the assizes, and Kroll's bills, and Verrall had been carried on borrowed money since 1829 in a style it could no longer support. In the autumn of 1836, the mortgages came onto the market, and Ledbury bought them, and everybody in the county knew within a week whose money he was buying with. Nora did not foreclose. She did not raise the interest, and she did not write a letter about it, and she left her grandmother in her house for the rest of her life. What she did do was decline once in writing, to attend a dinner at Virral Park, in 4 lines, in the same form Augusta had used to decline to attend her father's funeral in 1832. In December 1836, Augusta Vale's carriage came over the ridge at dusk on the Ludsham Road, which is the point where the whole front of Coldharbour Grange comes into view across the valley. She had not been up that road since before her husband died. There is only one account of what she said, and it comes from her companion, and it may not be true. What is certain is what she saw. For 23 years, anybody on that ridge at dusk had seen a black shape on the shoulder of the hill with nothing in it. On that evening, every window in 11 bays was lit. The carriage stopped for a while, and then turned and went back. Honora Vale lived at Coldharbour Grange for 51 years. She never married, which the county found extraordinary in 1840, unremarkable by 1860, and entirely her own business by 1880. She was High Sheriff's guest, church warden, a governor of the Ludsham Infirmary, and the largest single subscriber to the new road, and the parish rate on Coldharbour Grange was paid in full quarterly, in her own hand, for half a century. She kept 2 things by the head of the vault steps under the brewhouse, in one frame, behind glass. The first was Sir Rowland Kesteven's inventory of the 4th of March, 1811, 63 entries, signed and witnessed, which had told a coroner's jury that the owner of those goods was known. The second was a receipt for $4, dated the 12th of November, 1834, in Augusta Vale's upright hand, signed by Augusta Vale, and signed underneath by Honora Vale, for the purchase of the messuage called Coldharbour Grange, with all cellars, vaults, and all things whatsoever thereto belonging. And every winter of her life, on the hard mornings, she walked out into the yard at first light, before anyone else was up, and looked at where the frost lay and where it did not. All round her own buildings, she had learned at 22 in a cold brewhouse, the only thing her family had never bothered to learn, that everything worth having is somewhere under something nobody has troubled to look at, and that it will stay there, quietly, for as long as it takes, until somebody walks up the drive and stops and actually looks.